The acquisitions you guys made, we sung the praises of them. It wasn't as if you guys gave up a ton. It got a lot of nice pieces. Those pieces, however, have not performed like everybody thought they would. And what is the feedback you're getting in terms of maybe some of the struggles that those guys are going through? Is it just, hey, some of them came from the National League, it's an adjustment, or what are they dealing with?
You know, when you make these types of moves in the middle of the season, what you hope to be doing is pushing what is already a very strong team over the top. I mean, you rarely are trying to make trades that you're going to be singularly dependent upon that group of players to get you to the playoffs. When we made the Cliff Lee deal, we definitely were thinking more along the lines of, this is a piece that could be part of our core and really could be part of the group that pushes us to the playoffs. The rest of the group of guys that we acquired really were more complementary pieces. And I think in Cantu and Guzman's case, I haven't spoken to them about it, but I'm just guessing, is that they came from teams where they were more or less playing every day. They've come to secondary roles, but they also have been, they feel as if they've got an opportunity to help a franchise that hasn't been to the playoffs since 1999 to get there, that we've gone out of our way to acquire them. So I think they're heaping a lot of pressure on themselves, and I think you can see it in their at-bats that each game that goes by where they don't contribute, they're heaping more pressure on themselves. And so I'm not exactly sure what it's going to take to break the logjam for them. I think we still believe in them. Wash keeps putting them in positions to succeed. But needless to say, they're going to have to perform sooner or later because we are trying to win something this year, and we're not necessarily developing those guys for the future. They need to compete, they need to contend, and they need to help us win right now. So I wish we knew the answer as to why they're struggling to the extent that they are. I think the good news is that we're not singularly dependent upon them to get to the playoffs, but we were hopeful that once we got to the playoffs, if we do get there, that they would help us win once we got there. So we haven't given up hope yet on them, but they need to give us something to hold on to pretty soon. The catching position is probably at an all-time low in our opinion in terms of the caliber of players who are playing in the major leagues and who are on the horizon. It wasn't that long ago that we were sitting here with Gerald Laird and Jared Saltalamacchia and Taylor Teagarden and Max Ramirez, and we thought we were dealing from a tremendous area of strength where we're going to probably be able to trade two of those guys for blue chip players, settle into the other two being part of our franchise for the next foreseeable future. And lo and behold, we sit here 12 months later and none of the four has established themselves as a, everyday major league player. Gerald Laird is probably, the closest of the four, but even he is sharing a significant amount of time with Avila, and so, it just goes to show you how weak the position is right now. To answer your question, how are we going to try to address that is, I think we recognize the same thing that you do, which is we have three catchers in the big leagues right now. None of them is particularly adept offensively. I will say that the way Ron Washington runs his team is he wants that to be a defensive first, second, and third position, and then offensive fourth. So we are trying to focus a little bit more on the defensive side. One of the guys that Jamie didn't mention, and he may not be one of our sexiest prospects, but Jose Felix is at Double-A. He's a catcher that we signed out of Mexico, who we think is a very gifted defensive catcher and could be a suitable offensive catcher. He's not that far away from helping us, but candidly, going into this offseason, that will be one of our top priorities, is to address that position. I think we love the energy that trainers brought to the team, the professionalism, the hustle. I think we see him probably more as a backup catcher. So we will be setting our sights this offseason at filling the role of starting catcher for us, with the hope that between Teagarden and Trainer, we may have our second and third catchers, but we still need to find our number one. I think when you look at the playoff teams in the American League, it's, right now, Minnesota obviously has the best catcher in the game. He's one of the best players in the game. But really, the New York Yankees have a banged-up Jorge Posada and Francisco Cervelli. Tampa Bay has Kelly Shopik and Dearno Navarro and Jaso. And I'm not so certain that if you were sitting here in a similar type of event for the Yankees and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, they may not be asking a similar question as to the feeling that there's a competitive disadvantage at catcher for those teams as well. I think it really is, unfortunately, just the state of catching right now. To be fair, we're not going to be able to address that in between now and the playoffs. I think we're going to have to make the best of the situation we have right now, count on the fact that our other offensive pieces are going to be able to pick up the slack there, and that those guys will be very serviceable defenders and hopefully execute and play small ball in the playoffs and help us, advance runners. But we definitely won't be counting on that group of guys to be our major run producers.
Right quick, that series of questions reminded me, has there been any, it's been a crazy season with everything that's happened off the field and the courtroom, the moves you guys have made, so on and so forth. Has there been anything more improbable than Benji Molina's triple earlier in the year? Has that probably been the most improbable moment of the year?
I think the biggest challenge for our broadcast so far has been when he hits into double plays and he's still not in the frame. Like they can't get a wide enough angle to actually see where he is running down the line versus where the throw's being made. Yeah, that was absolutely remarkable. And listening to the call of that was as if somebody had just. I can't imagine if we win the World Series there'll be that much energy in Eric Nadell's voice when he makes the call that Benji Molina had a triple. We have a very large Ouija board in our office that we use liberally. I guess the best way I could describe that is maybe to take you through one of the trades we made. I didn't start working in the game that long ago, but when I did start working, we had these off-season meetings, the winter meetings and the GM meetings. GMs traveled with their teams a little bit more often, so the point I'm making is those types of discussions were a little bit more done in person. Now with the technology age, whether it's a text, whether it's an email, whether it's a phone call, that's usually the beginning of a trade discussion. But from our standpoint, and I'm sure most other teams try to do this, is we constantly are evaluating every other team's 40-man roster to try to understand where are they deficient, where do they potentially have a surplus. We catalog, we literally in the office, regardless of whether it's myself, JD, one of our scouts, one of our coaches, we catalog every single discussion we have with another team. So if we ever get to a point where, for argument's sake, we want to trade a guy like Gerald Laird, we can reference the last 4 years worth of conversations of every team that has ever asked us, hey, would you consider trading Gerald Laird or one of your catchers? Or we've read somewhere anecdotally they're looking for a catcher. One of our scouts hears the scuttlebutt that team likes Gerald Laird. But I think probably let's walk through the Cliff Lee deal. And Cliff Lee was probably one of our, it was our most significant acquisition since the Mark Teixeira trade. It's kind of the converse of that deal. But we feel like we can objectively evaluate our team, and we recognize that if we truly plan on getting to and excelling in the playoffs, it was imperative that we got a top of the rotation type pitcher. So we then, canvassed the league. One thing that's been very consistent about working with John Daniels is if there's ever a #1 starting pitcher, if anybody in this room who perceives as a #1 starting pitcher that we think could be out there, we make a call. We have ever since I've been in this role. I think we'll continue doing that. Whatever was said in this room stays in this room. We call once every 7 to 10 days on Zach Greinke, just to see if they may want to trade him now. And he's not alone. If you feel that there's a #1 starter in the game, we have called on him in the last 6 months. So we had already laid the groundwork in expressing interest to Seattle once they acquired Cliff Lee. We have interest in him as well. If the season doesn't go quite as you guys planned, we would have interest. So we had some background. We had some background with him to begin with. But our other thought process was that we assessed the market that Dan Herron could be on the market and Roy Oswald could be on the market. From our scout standpoint, we felt Cliff Lee was separated above those two guys as the guy who could help us and impact the team the most this year. Whether or not that was accurate, yet to be determined, because we evaluated his performance as to how he's going to contribute in the playoffs, ultimately. But so we will call. So JD calls Jack Zarenzik, beginning of July. We have distinct interest in Cliff Lee. He says at that juncture, I'm going to give this team another 7 to 10 days. If we don't snap out of it, we got another run through the American League West. If we don't win, we will put this guy in the market. But we're inclined to wait to July 31st because he doesn't want to minimize the value of Cliff Lee. So JD basically says, fair enough, I'll call you in 7 to 10 days. 5 days later, he calls him and says, what will it take to get Cliff Lee? And Jack says, he basically tells us what it is. It's Justin Smoke and it's multiple other players. We say, appreciate it, we're not doing that. And so in these trades, I think one thing that's important is setting the parameters early. despite the fact that what they're demanding in the trade isn't always necessarily what you have to give up, there are general managers. I guess I should back up 1 second. As much as this whole game's about talent evaluation, it's no different when you're looking at other teams' general managers. We keep a track of what their tendencies are. So for argument's sake, Larry Beinfest, who works for the Florida Marlins, when he says what it's going to take to get a deal done, that's it. There's no negotiation. When Josh Beckett hit the market, he told us exactly what we had to trade to get Josh Beckett. And when we tried to tinker with it, by the time we massaged the deal a little bit, he had already traded him to Boston. So we know that's an experience we had early on, which if we'd known now what we knew then what we knew now, we may have been able to acquire Josh Beckett, or at least we would have understood the parameters of that deal. In talking to Jack Zarenzik, despite the fact that his demands were up here, we had a strong sense that we still were going to have an option here. And that was a tribute to all of our scouts and the fact that we had so many players that were coveted in the game. So there was a lot of back and forth. The next layer of that negotiation was, we don't want to wait till July 31st. What do we have to do today to take him off the market? And oh, by the way, we're going to ask you to eat some of his salary because we're in bankruptcy. So that's thrown out there early on. But part of this is like just fishing for what's the most important lever to the other party. They didn't really care that much about the money. They cared about getting the players that they felt were the best players. So we were told about 24 hours before we ultimately acquired Cliff Lee that we were out. Unless we were going to put these 4 players in the deal, you're done, we're going in a different direction. We heard it was the Yankees, fair enough, we're out. So we went to bed that night, kind of feeling like we put our best foot forward. We thought we had a deal that should have gotten it done. It didn't get it done. We're disappointed. JD wakes up the next morning with a text on his phone saying, are you guys still interested in Cliff Lee? The deal with the Yankees is not 100% done. To which I think JD then said, you've already rejected me once. This feels like the girl I asked to prom who said no, then came back and said, hey, wait a minute. Are you sure you would consider going with me? And then I said yes, and then she said no again. Like, are you going to dump me twice? JD didn't have a lot of luck with the ladies in high school. It's a sidebar conversation, we can have it in a minute. So from that point forward, up until that point, we had not put Justin Smoke in the deal. We said, we hear you that there's a crack in the door. Do we open the door wide open if we put Justin Smoke in the deal? And they said, yes. And then it became, what we then understood it to be was, clearly the way Jack wanted to do the deal was he wanted to get the best minor league player he could, or very close to major league prospect. The Yankees had, what our offer was constituted that he rejected, probably had the 3rd best player. The Yankees had the 2nd best player. Justin Smoke was number 1. So once we got the sense that Justin Smoke was number 1, it was then just a matter of tinkering with the other pieces involved.
Just a quick follow-up question. I know it's different in each sport, but in Major League Baseball, how much consideration goes into who a player that you're trying to acquire, who their agent is? Because that's a big deal in basketball and to some degree football.
I think it's a significant deal when you start talking about your thoughts of retaining the player beyond just the scope of that one season. Now, in Cliff Lee's case, I think we recognized the reality of the situation is he was going to become a free agent, and the likelihood of us re-signing before the end of the year was really very small. So in this instance, it was probably less relevant, but absolutely it's a huge consideration when we're acquiring players, because we aspire to acquire a core group of guys who can win for the foreseeable future, not just for 1 year. Like we're hoping not to just spike for 1 season and then regress significantly. In this instance, we thought, in essence, this was a piece we needed. We owed it to our fan base. We had the pieces to get the player. We weren't going to use the bankruptcy at all as a crutch. And so, to a certain extent, we were willing to make a short-term decision in this one instance because we felt it was a piece that could really help us win in the playoffs.